Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Telling Your Story. My name is Nathan Zabidio. I am a program specialist in fiscal sponsorship here at Fractured Atlas, which means that every day I get the chance to help empower artists and arts organizations become more successful fundraisers. I hope everyone can hear me okay. It looks like we have about 12 people on the call. Um, Actually, if someone wouldn't mind using the GoToWebinar chat functionality to send me a message confirming that you can hear the sound of my voice, that would be great. Fantastic. Yes, got some confirmation. Thank you so much. One time I started giving one of these webinar calls and got about 10 minutes through my presentation before someone finally chimed in saying, "Is this thing still happening?" Because I'd neglected to turn on my microphone. So I'm glad I don't need to start at the beginning 10 minutes into my call. There will be an opportunity for you all to use the chat functionality to ask questions at the end of today's presentation. Feel free to chat me questions throughout. Likely I'll save all questions for the end unless it is super relevant to what I'm talking about at the time. Tomorrow, I will be emailing you all a recording of this presentation, so there's no need to take copious notes throughout. So you'll be receiving a link to where a recording of this presentation will live on YouTube, and you're welcome to share that with anyone that you think might find the content useful or helpful to them. Let's see, any other housekeeping we want to cover? I don't think so. So let's dive in. It should really go without saying that we tell stories as a basic human function every day of our lives, to our friends and family, to our coworkers and neighbors and our therapists and even to ourselves. The vast majority of our interactions involve some form of storytelling, whether you're at the doctor's office explaining how you think you got that rash, or at a job interview describing how you increased sales 200% in the fourth quarter, around the water cooler sharing the latest hot gossip at your office, or on the phone with a close friend or family member explaining why you can't make their wedding after all. Uh, Artists, as you know, are creative storytellers, taking this innate human skill and elevating it. So it's funny to me when I see crowdfunding campaigns or grant proposals, even mission statements where artists have jettisoned the tools that come naturally to them, to all humans for that matter, and forget the basics of good storytelling. Today's presentation is intended to help you better organize your thinking so that you can craft stories that will serve your fundraising and marketing needs. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to cover, the major topics we're going to go over today. First, we're going to discuss identifying your audience. Before you can tell a good story, you need to know who you're telling it to. Once we've figured out who our ideal listeners are, we need to obtain some clarity around what our goals with the story are. What impact are we trying to make on our audience? We'll briefly touch on making sure that we're using the correct medium to tell our story to the people that we want to reach. And then we're going to actually dive into starting the story, which involves figuring out, who our hero is, and then what that hero's journey is. What's the plot of the story that we're telling? And then finally, before we get into questions, we'll talk about some other tips and miscellaneous things that I want to cover about telling a good story when it comes to fundraising and marketing. A lot of this might sound simplistic, but I've worked for Fractured Atlas for 5 years now. I've reviewed, on a yearly basis, review thousands of crowdfunding campaigns, pitch videos, individual appeal letters, grant proposals, and I know firsthand that artists often find themselves ill-equipped to talk about their own work, which is a problem that Bob Ross never had. It's hard to know what's important to convey to others when you're so close to the work that you're creating. So I hope that our webinar today will give you a place to start, so that you don't feel like you need to reinvent the wheel each time you want to send out a tweet about the work that you're doing. So where do we begin? First, um, identifying your audience. It's it's highly likely that you'll have many different types of audiences for the story that you want to tell, even if it's for the same project. So you're producing a film, likely there are a lot of different types of people that you want to be reaching and engaging with, to either make a donation or uh, you know actually attend a screening of your film. And you'll want to identify all possible audiences that you'll be addressing and tailor your story for each one of them. If not, create an entirely different story that you'll want to be telling to each category of audience that you want to be reaching. And with any marketing or with any fundraising, you're probably going to be targeting hundreds, if not thousands, of potential supporters. And I'm not saying that you should have a separate story for each and every one of them. Probably the story that you're going to be telling your uncle is the same one you're going to be telling your aunt. But there will be lots of different types of people that you're going to want to be engaging with. And so, what I recommend doing is taking your list of potential supporters, your list of potential patrons, and dividing them up into segments. Think of it as grouping them into categories that describe in some way who they are. And here are some examples that might help you brainstorm different types of segments. So you might start with some really broad categories like donors or grant makers or customers. Um, these might be a little too broad, but they at least describe different types of stakeholders who you would want to be telling your story to. So from here, you probably want to dig down and get a little bit more specific with some of your segments. For example, donors and customers might be a little bit too broad. So what are some even more specific categories? Family and friends. Uh, Acquaintances, people that you went to high school with, or that you haven't talked to in a while, and then total strangers. Um, and these are still pretty broad, but think about the distinctions between some of these categories. It's almost certain that the story that will interest your family and friends is quite different from the story that's going to interest people that have never met you before. Ditto that with foundations that might award you a grant. They're probably going to want to know different things, hear a different story than the people that you're actually selling your art to. Um, so, yes, in my opinion, none of these are quite specific enough. If your time constraints allow, I would suggest taking your list of potential supporters and getting even more granular with it. How much more descriptive can you get in segmenting your population? For example, let's say you're putting on a play for your neighborhood. Maybe you want to be targeting specifically children who love the theater. Maybe that's a specific type of audience that you want to be reaching out to. Or you're a visual artist and you want to engage with other visual artists, but specifically those that admire Damien Hirst. Or you are a choreographer and you want to be talking to elderly dancers and their caregivers. The more specifically you can describe and pin down the demographics of your different types of audiences, the better able you'll be to create a story that addresses their specific needs and interests. And once you've identified who you're reaching out to and and kind of gotten as specific as possible with creating different segments of audiences, um, you'll want to clarify the goal of the story that you're telling to each of them. Your goal being the intended impact on the recipient. And what I suggest doing is for each of your segments, having just a single sentence impact statement that describes your goal. And this single sentence should really answer two questions. What do I want the recipient to feel? So, like, literally, what emotions do I want them to feel as a result of my story? And what actions do I want the recipient to take as a result of the emotion that they feel? So, for example, I want this recipient to feel excited that they are going to have a fun, unique experience at my show so that they will buy a ticket. Or I want this recipient to feel confident that I am a competent, skilled administrator so that they will award me a grant. Again, we're not talking about reinventing the wheel here. We're not talking about something that is totally outlandish that you should have never thought of before. But this is a skill that you should be applying to every story that you're going to be telling for a compelling purpose in your life. You know, you're writing a cover letter to get an awesome job. You are writing a pitch for your crowdfunding video. You want to be thinking about the audience and the specific goal, the specific impact you want to make on your audience, how they should feel about you, and what actions you want them to take as a result of how they feel. And being crystal clear on who you're reaching out to and what impact you want to make will really help to start organize your thinking. You know, I've produced plays before. Um, I, I often start by writing the 5-page letter that includes all of my thoughts on the play that I'm directing or producing, and all of my feelings about it. Likely all of those thoughts and feelings are not going to be super interesting to every single person that I want to reach out to. So what facts and arguments and feelings and opinions that you have um, would you find most effective or most interesting to the specific segments that you've identified, and how are they going to help achieve the specific goal, the specific impact that you want to make on that segment? A key part of this is knowing if you're reaching your audience in the most correct ways. So different recipients will be most responsive to different forms of outreach. And I don't want to get into too much detail with this since it's pretty self-explanatory. You know, the same people that you're reaching via Twitter might and likely are different from the ones that you should put on your newsletter mailing list. To use some of my previous examples, you know, if you're reaching out to children who love theater, they probably aren't going to respond well to a formal letter writing campaign. And if you're looking at elderly dancers, maybe they're not the best audience for your YouTube videos. Both of those are obviously generalizations. You don't want to treat your audiences as stereotypes. If I could quickly plug one of Fractured Atlas's programs for a sec here, we would recommend with all donor outreach, with all your marketing efforts, that you use a CRM or customer relations management software to keep track of your patrons, your interactions with them, what you know about them, and their preferences. So Fractured Atlas has our own CRM software called Artfully, which is just artful.ly. And that's the web address you can navigate to find out more about it. And you can access it for free. So with a CRM, you can take your list of donors or potential donors and segment it into different categories. So your children who love theater or your elderly dancers. And for each one of those prospects, you can record a detailed history of what you know about them and your interactions with them. So if you find out that, contrary to what you might expect, one of your elderly patrons actually does love your YouTube videos, make a note of that in your profile of them and reach out to them using the medium that they prefer. Um, Not too much I want to say about that. I Artfully has a lot of great webinars on using the software and best practices for keeping a CRM. So I would refer you to that program for more information. But let's get back to the story that we're trying to tell. Once you've identified your audience, clarified your goals, figured out how you're reaching out to them, it's time to start with one of the key ingredients of every good story, creating a compelling protagonist. Yes, the story that we're telling is likely a nonfiction story. We're telling the story of why you should care about the film that I'm producing, or the play that I'm producing, or the visual arts exhibition that I'm putting together. But we're still going to want to use some of the basic building blocks of telling a good fiction story. And to pick our protagonist, let's just quickly revisit some English 101 concepts, because your protagonist story is going to be told from one of the 3 points of view. So, first person. If I'm telling a first person story, I'm saying that I'm awesome. I'm an awesome artist, or my organization is awesome, right? Uh, you're selling yourself, you're selling your work and or your organization as the hero of this story to your potential patrons or donors. Things that you might want to think about are your history as an artist, or the history or origin story of your organization. Where do you come from? What makes you important and, a unique snowflake? Where are you going? How is the work that you're doing uh, different? How is it really making the most impact? Um, Not necessarily my favorite point of view, because uh, uh, I hear a lot of artists brag about things that I'm like, well, that's not super impressive. For example, one time some artists I was working with, as a major part of their story, said, uh, we made our own budget. We formed an LLC all by ourselves. And maybe that's impressive to your mom, but bragging about having the bare minimum competency of a business person isn't necessarily your strongest sell. So, unless you've got some really awesome facts about yourself to be pitching in a first person story, maybe think about maybe thinking about having yourself as the hero or your organization as the hero isn't isn't the first thing that I would do. Instead, I might think about third person, which is the people that we work with are awesome. The people that we serve, our audience is awesome. The vast majority of your grant proposals are probably going to be in third person. This is the work that our organization does. This is why the work is important. This is the impact that it's making on these people's lives. And that story, the story of how they are, our audience is interacting with our work, is the most important one. When you tell your story in the third person, you're focusing on the people that your work directly affects. So if you're giving art classes to students that don't have access, what is the effect that those art classes are having on those students' lives? What are those students then going out to do as a result of your art class? You're doing a mural in a neighborhood that doesn't have um, much creative expression. How are you involving the neighborhood? What is their role in the work that you're doing? What is the impact on them? What are the audience that are going to go see your film? What are they going to take away from it? How are they going to be moved by it? um, and again, yeah, this is going to be most common for grant proposals, probably for things like uh, uh, press releases are going to be in third person, where you're kind of at a step removed from the work that you're doing. You're describing the audience. And the final person is second person, which is you. You're awesome, reader or listener or viewer of the work that I'm doing. You're the hero of our story. You're putting the reader, the recipient, into the hero's shoes, showing the important role that they are currently playing or could play in participating in your work. And actually, regardless of whether or not you're going to use the first person or third person point of views, all of your stories, in my opinion, should include a healthy dose of second person. For example, your donation is going to save the day. With your heroic support, you're going to help us provide, I don't know, nursing home residents with the musical performances or artistic nourishment that they need to maintain a high quality of life. Or imagine all of the fun you're going to be having when you attend our immersive dance performance. You really want to have your recipient, regardless of the segment that they're in, be able to imagine themselves participating in your work either by making that donation, by buying a ticket, by purchasing your artwork, and having a sense of how it's going to be meaningful to them. So, next, let's talk about once you've identified the hero, what journey they're going to be going on. What's your story's plot? What kind of story are you telling? I've had some success in coaching artists on this by asking them to think about um, fiction genres, which kind of appeals to their creativity, but applying uh, some types of stories found in different genre fiction to their marketing and fundraising appeal. For example, is the story you're trying to tell a romance where you're telling the tale of people that are falling in love with your theater company and the work that you're doing? Um, People that have never gone to the theater before and are realizing how much they love it, how much how passionate it can make them feel. Or is it a science fiction story where you're showing how groundbreaking your work is, how out of this world the paintings that you're doing are? Um, a lot of other different genres you can apply. Is it a Homeric myth where you're talking about the building blocks of humanity, or you're reaching back into the depths of time to plumb plumb for a story. Um, you might also consider uh, using some of the tried and true methods explored in novel writing or screenplay writing advice. There are literally hundreds of books that have been written on how to write a screenplay, Save the Cat being one. For example, there's a famous maxim from writer and educator John Gardner, who used to say that all stories can be summed up in two plots. First is a person goes on a journey, and the second is a stranger comes to town. And you can start to group all of the different stories that you've ever heard in your life into one of these two buckets. Lord of the Rings, um, Frodo and company goes on a journey. Stranger comes to town. Let's see, what's a good example of that? Uh, there's gotta be one, right? Uh, I'll let you fill in the gaps there. I don't have a great example that comes to mind on my own. But how might you apply this to the stories that you're telling? Okay, someone goes on a journey. Frodo goes to destroy the ring. Your work is going to be transporting the recipient, the audience, outside of their normal day-to-day existence. How is that going to happen? What journey is your work going to be taking these people on? Alternately, stranger comes to town. I guess a lot of horror movies use. Here I have Carmen Sandiego, but a lot of horror movies might use stranger comes to town. Not necessarily you want your marketing or fundraising pitch to be a horror movie, but your exciting work is gonna break through the tough exterior of the people that it's designed for and hit your audience where they live. It's going to confront hard truths. It's going to really expose flaws in the system. However you want to think about it. Uh, Stranger comes to town. Um, while I'm on the topic of plot, I have a couple stories that you should avoid. Um, I'm gonna say I call it the sad sack story, but you might think of it as like the tragedy, or you really don't want your story to be the same as the book of Job from the Bible. Um, People want to involve themselves with winning stories that make them feel good, and even if you have a desperate need or you're uh, addressing a really desperate need in your community or neighborhood. These kids don't have art funding. Isn't that a tragedy? We're going to go out of business if we don't get this, if this production doesn't sell tickets. Even if that is the case, your need is desperate. Your audience is going to be turned off by having desperation in your story. Um, if you want there to still be the uplifting ending at the end, yes, times are tough, or yes, these kids really need the artwork, but with your support, we're going to be turning things around. We're going to be making a difference in their lives. Certainly tell the story of the need, but have there be that glimmer of hope at the end, that optimistic ending, so that people aren't just depressed by the story that you're telling. Another story that I see people tell a lot is the mean competitive story, where they're like, "Well, I don't like this other theater company's work, and here's why you shouldn't like it either." You don't need to trash talk other artists or other arts organizations that you might view as competitors. No one's going to want to feel great about a mean-spirited story. You're not doing perception of yourself or your work any favors by appearing to be um, even if you do feel truly victimized by this other film production company stole my idea, how dare they? uh, to trash talk other people isn't gonna it won't behoove you. So try not to do that in the story that you're telling. And finally, a sales a sales pitch. One of the things that we like to tell people is that quality should be assumed, right? If I'm writing a letter to you asking you to support my project, you as the reader should assume that I think it's great. So I don't need to use superlatives like, fabulous, fantastic, huge, amazingly successful. Like, don't use um, just words that address the high quality of the work that you're doing. Assume that's going to be the case. Um, you know, Show, don't tell. Don't insist that your work is great or that it will change people's lives. Convince people to see for themselves by telling them a good story. You know, what are the specific how is the impact of your work huge or tremendous or successful or great? What is the ultimate effect on your audience, and make them care about that, not just on how awesome and successful and amazing your work is. Okay, what to do next? Some other things that I want you to think about once you've put some thought into audience, goals, medium, protagonist, plot. Keep it short. When you're organizing your thinking like this, start to distill. So, like I said, I write out the 5-page story. Maybe that's a minimum of everything that I think and feel about it. Then figure out what's truly relevant to the story that you're trying to tell. Everything else might belong in a different story, but if I'm trying to reach children who love the theater in my neighborhood with a second person story that is a sci-fi tale about how you know fantastical the play that I'm going to produce to them is, what are the specific facts and opinions that are going to really support that story? Probably if I'm writing a grant application that is for the same production, different facts and opinions are going to go into that grant application. An entirely different story would be told. Um, I would also start seeing stories everywhere. It's not just in the YouTube video that you're creating that you're going to put on your crowdfunding video. It's in each individual tweet. It's in your mission statement, in your posters, in the design of your posters or your programs. Each messaging opportunity that you put out should be considered a mini story in its own right, and have thought about audience impact, protagonist and plot even in a tweet. This will start to become kind of second nature to you so that you're not mapping out and diagramming, a three-act narrative structure for each Facebook post or Instagram post, but you are putting some thought into the story that your Instagram post tells. And to take it a step further, think critically about the hidden stories that could emerge from the rest of your business practices. For example, what story does the layout of your studio or office tell to your collaborators? What story does your budget tell about your priorities? Start to think in terms of storytelling in every aspect of what you do, because if you aren't super conscious about it, a story is going to be told regardless. Whether you like it or not, there's going to be some implicit or unconscious story being told to some audience somewhere about your work. People are going to look at um, the lobby of your theater and say, oh, they clearly don't care about um, efficient workflow when it comes to checking in and ripping the ticket and getting the program. Or, they don't care about me being comfortable because they don't have snacks or refreshments. Think about the implicit hidden stories that lie behind everything that you do, that could be told about the work that you do, and even your behind the scenes business practices. And finally, iterate, experiment, test things out. See what works and doesn't work, and constantly refine your storytelling. Maybe you'll find that the children theater lovers respond well to a certain type of story. Maybe maybe they really respond to stories told in the first person, communicated on YouTube, um, or maybe not. See what stories and what mediums get the best responses. You'll be getting real-time feedback in the form of donations, sales, likes, retweets, etc. You'll When you put your stories out there, you'll know what's working or not. Maybe you're using software like MailChimp that'll show you what percentage of people open your newsletter and read it. So you can do some real testing there to say, hey, uh, people that attended our last play really liked this story. They clicked on this email. They didn't care for this story, didn't click on that email. Well, now I know the types of things that they're interested in and the types of things they prefer. Or your Instagram posts, um, how many how many favorites, how many hearts are you getting on your posts, and move in that direction. Move in the direction of what your audiences and potential patrons seem to care about. Okay. I am going to open up for questions shortly. Thank you so much for taking the time to attend this webinar. This is the first time we've given it. Even just from presenting it right now, I see a lot of changes I want to make to it, so I appreciate you being my guinea pigs and hearing it's not a rough draft, but hearing the most completed first draft. Being a good arts entrepreneur who excels at selling their work to others isn't divorced from the creative process. Bring your talents as an artist, as a storyteller, to bear in your business. Telling better stories is just going to make it easier for you to share your work with others, to get people interested in the work that you're doing, and hopefully make a donation, or make a purchase, or show some form of support, whatever form of support you're seeking, when they're responding emotionally to the story that you're telling. All right, opening it up for questions. Someone had a good example of a stranger comes to town narrative. Mary Poppins. That was my favorite movie when I was a little tyke. Let's see. Looks like no questions. Oh, thank you for your kind words. I'm getting a lot of compliments, which is very kind. Um, uh, let's see. Okay, someone has a question. Any suggestions on CRMs to use and how often you should post news about your project? Um, Great question. So obviously our preference is that you use Artfully. You might check out salesforce.com. They have CRM software. If you just Google CRM, you'll probably find a lot of different examples. And kind of look at the features to see how granular you can get with segmenting your audience. How often you should post news about your project is going to really depend upon the medium. So, um, if we're talking about social media, there's obviously uh, different conventions, different standards for how often you should be posting to different platforms. Facebook, probably you don't want to be doing like 6 posts a day and be clogging up their newsfeed. Maybe a couple posts a week. Instagram, maybe 1 or 2 posts a day. Twitter, probably several posts a day, since people are going to be following a lot of different feeds. Um, Letter writing campaigns, you don't want to be, for your own purposes, because it's going to be costly. You don't want to be sending out spam that people are just going to put right in their recycling bin. Um, Crowdfunding campaigns, maybe 2 or 3 a year. You want to be mindful of not overwhelming your potential patrons or supporters. But what I would say is, if you're using a lot of different means, you're using a lot of different media, or you're telling a lot of different types of stories, um, you can be reaching out to them frequently. If you're not constantly asking for money, then reach out to them as often as you have news that you want to share, especially once someone's made a donation or once someone's actually attended a play. They're going to start to feel invested in the work that you're doing and will want to hear more frequent updates from you, especially if it's not just marketing and fundraising. If it's like, look at this award that we won, or look at how successful we were, they're going to want to share in your celebration of that. Or here's some behind the scenes update photos from our film. Here's a demo track from this album that we've just recorded. Uh, if you've got a lot of different types of content that you're putting out there, be in touch as much as possible. And with a CRM, you can be mindful of your patrons' preferences. If they've opted into or out of your newsletter, only send your newsletter to people that really want it. Only, email people that have actually agreed to participate in your email list. And, as long as you're telling a good story, people are gonna people are gonna people are going to respond regardless how much you're getting in touch with them. Again, within reason, and also within the conventions of whatever medium that you're using. Um, I gave a political donation 8 years ago, and I get a lot of emails uh, every day, and some of them I respond to. Some of them get me to make another political donation. So think about you know, think about frequency, think about medium, think about different uh, types of stories. Um, uh, Someone asked, one of the things I would like to include in my story is the choice to be fiscally sponsored rather than become a nonprofit. Seems as though fiscal sponsorship is still a new concept for potential patrons or supporters to get. Wondering if others experience the same dilemma. Yes. What I will say is that tax deductibility can be an important part of your story when making a fundraising appeal to donors. For many donors, just the mere fact that their contribution will be tax deductible will be enough, regardless of the actual mechanism of how their donation is tax deductible. Probably, if you're getting even more specific into fiscal sponsorship versus 501c3 status, I would say you might be telling a first-person story about your competence as a business person, and here are some facts that you might throw at them. First off, uh, it fiscal sponsorship we've found, and for those of you who might be on this call who aren't fiscally sponsored, um, not sure how you got here. Welcome to Fractured Atlas and Fiscal Sponsorship. But fiscal sponsorship is how we help artists fundraise by extending some of the benefits of our own 501c3 status to artists and arts organizations who don't have that, so that they can accept tax-deductible donations from donors. Okay, but what we found is that fiscal sponsorship is actually a money-saving tool for artists and arts organizations of a certain size and scope. And what I mean is that the things that are required for maintaining 501c3 status, so the necessary filings with the IRS, being able to conduct regular audits of your books, even issuing tax receipts to donors that are accurate, consulting with an attorney to make sure that everything that you're doing is above board. These things can eat up more than 7%, more than our administrative fee, in contributed revenue for arts organizations of a certain size. This is a pretty interesting fact for people that might be concerned about fiscal sponsorship. You're saying more of your donation is going to providing the actual programs and services that we're creating, and less of it is going to overhead costs, less of it is going to administrative costs as a fiscally sponsored project than if I were to actually have 501c3 status on my own. What we found is that usually the threshold of a budget size where an artist or arts organization might consider making the leap to forming their own 501c3 is generally around $1 million budget annually or more. That might be the place where you're able to have dedicated staff, like an accountant that's full-time or even part-time on your books, automated processes in place, like your own credit card processor on your website that has a processing fee that's reasonable, bank fees or attorney fees that aren't going to break your bank in place, where it becomes maybe a question of, yeah, I should form my own 501c3 because I can save that administrative fee to our fiscal sponsor. So I would say that the story you're trying to tell there is one of being a competent business person where you're saving yourself money. You are you're on the stepping stones toward obtaining your own 501c3 status, and you're doing so in a way that allows you to scale organically, by cutting down on costs, by focusing on providing your services and products in a way that's cost effective. Really great question, though. And I would say that it actually is less of a concern for your donors than you might think. And another thing is, this is a little unrelated to storytelling, but for people that are concerned about fiscal sponsorship, for donors that are concerned about fiscal sponsorship, have them get in touch with us directly, or have us get in touch with them. Say, hey, Mr. Johnson, I know you're concerned about fiscal sponsorship. I'm going to have someone with Fractured Atlas get in touch with you. Send us their email address or phone number. We're going to reach out. Okay. Any other questions? I'm happy to end this call at 45 minutes. We're kind of experimenting with having these calls at 2 p.m. We often have been giving them at 7:30 p.m. Oh, great, another question. How much of your budget should you share? For example, X amount of our dollars will allow me to buy X amount of supplies. What's a nice way to talk about this? So, as I said, a budget tells a story in its own way. Um, when you're telling a story um, the goal of your organization, if it's a fundraising story, probably since you want to be explicit when it comes to your impact on what the next step your donor is to take is, hopefully it's to make a donation, and hopefully you are, taking your different segments and saying, okay, this is my former college classmate segment. I expect that maybe they don't make a ton of money right now because we're fresh out of college. Or maybe we're 25 years out of college and they should be well established in their career and they're making a ton of money. So I know that the amount of money that I want to ask from them is X dollars. So that in your story that you're telling, you're like, here's my romance story. You've fallen in love with the work that I'm doing. Um, I hope you'll consider making a donation of $500, which will go towards our goal of $25,000. Or your $500 gift will cover 10 hours of rehearsal space for our dance company. I think it's a good idea to include some budget, stats. Again, if you think it's relevant to the impact that you're trying to make with the specific audience. Um, but uh, not necessary to have all of your different income, revenue streams, all of your different expenses for all of your audiences. Probably a grant proposal. They're going to be very interested in having that be a key component of your story. Probably a crowdfunding campaign that's targeted to your friends and family. Maybe not so much. So, you know, uh, it's a long way of saying it can depend. Um, More compliments. I'm glad you found this useful. Really, this is the first time I've given this presentation. Um, I also just got off of a couple days ago, like 26-hour flight, and then finished making the presentation, so I wasn't even sure that it was coherent. Um, Great. I'm glad that this has been helpful to so many of you. Again, I'm going to email you a link to a recording of this webinar, likely tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that in your inboxes. If there are no other questions, I'm going to end the call now. Hope you all enjoy the rest of your first day of autumn. And please email us at support@fracturedatlas.org if you have any follow-up questions. Give us a call at 888-692-7878 and hope to talk to you soon. Okay, have a great day.